Hello everyone and welcome to AustCham Thailand's Business Connections Community, an online program where we keep you updated on what's happening in the Australian Thai business community. I'm your host, Brendan Cunningham, Executive Director at AustCham. In today's episode, we're looking at the big story in the Australian news last week around cyber security. Two big hacks of two big organisations. We have one of our newer members, Cynch Security, coming in to talk about that and how you can protect yourself as well. Continuing the theme of risk, we're going to look at health risk and more importantly, how you can keep yourself insured, meeting Pacific Prime Thailand. And finally, I have a real treat for you in our community section. We're going to have a chat with David Armstrong, an honorary member at AustCham Thailand and one of the most interesting people you are ever going to meet. Stay with us.
เลิกได้อารมณ์ร้อนเพราะบ้านร้อนใช้หลังคาเมทัลชีทบลูสโคปแซกคูลเพราะคูลโคตติ้งเทคโนโลยีที่อัปเกรดขึ้นอีกขั้นช่วยให้บ้านเย็นขึ้น4องศาเย็นเลือกหลังคาเมทัลชีทบลูสโคปแซกคูล
And welcome back. In our business section today, we're going to look at a critical issue that's in the news everywhere in Australia at the moment. Cyber security. We've of course seen two big hacks in Optus and Medibank in Australia, and it's on the back of a recent report that's showing it's not only the big companies, every company is at risk. Now, fortunate for us as AustCham members, we have a new member joining us, Cynch Securities, who are experts in this field, and I'm joined today by Adam Selwood, the co-founder at Cynch. Adam, how are you?
Fantastic, Brendan. Thanks for having me along.
Pleasure. So, Adam, I think I told you I was sitting down watching the ABC last Friday, and it's all that they were reporting on, this report and the recent big hacks. And I reached straight out to you guys at Cynch and said, I think our AustCham members would like to know a bit more about this. So thanks for making yourself available.
No, thanks for the opportunity. It's certainly a frightening time for many in Australia at the moment, and it's definitely a sign of what's happening just internationally as well. So yeah, it's a good time. If there was ever a good time to talk about cybersecurity, why not now?
Absolutely. So as we mentioned, the two big reports or the two big hacks in Australia were Optus and Medibank, simply because there's so many Australians that are in that database and affected. Can you give us your insights either into those big ones or just the report in general that happened to come out last week as well?
Yeah, so the ACS, so the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, it's sort of the big players in Australia run by the government. It's a government department in Australia that's responsible for cybersecurity. They released a report specifically talking about what's going on at the moment. Now, keep in mind, this is looking at data from last financial year, so right. Going back sort of between July and June of the last 12 months or 18 months.
So
this is
before the big hacks, actually, right? Yeah.
Before Medibank and Optus. But even back then, as early as July this year, they were seeing security incidents reported to them every 7 minutes in Australia. So something significant going out to the Australian government saying, hey, we've got a problem, let's get onto it. Right. One of the concerns, I guess, from our perspective is that there's less than 5% of those calls were actually then dealt with or responded to by the government. So there's like 95% of people or individuals or companies having an incident are kind of left to their own, which is a bit of a concern.
Is that a resource thing? Is that because they simply can't attend to them all?
There's just that many of them they received somewhere in the order of about 75,000 reports in the last 12 months. So there's only so many of these that you can deal with, and they're usually pretty complicated, and we don't have an infinite amount of resources. So we need to basically allocate them where they can go. And the government rightly is going to focus on the big players like Optus and Medibank and government departments and all the others.
Right. So what exactly happened if we look at, say, Optus and Medibank? Is there someone sitting in a corner just on their keyboard being nasty?
Well,
what happened?
Certainly seems like that was what happened at Optus. Optus and Medibank, both two very different experiences and situations. So Optus, for those watching, if you're not familiar, it's the second largest telecommunications company in Australia. Roughly a third of Australians have an account with Optus or have had an account with Optus. And the result of the hack that occurred was that basically the information about Australians, a third of Australians was compromised in that one attack. And that's about just over a month ago now that occurred. And what happened was that they missed a few processes and did the wrong thing and essentially published all of the information on the internet. And someone found it and downloaded it and then tried to threaten Optus to release it unless they paid. And it's been a bit of a shambles ever since, to be honest. So they've been trying to recover that and figure that one out. Medibank, on the other hand, which they also had a hack around about the same time, but it didn't really become clear what had happened until this week, essentially. But Medibank have about 10 million Australians on the books, and not just the sort of contact information for Medibank, but also health records, which is really worrying. So you can think of all those sensitive conversations and treatments that you've had over the years. All of those records potentially have been accessed and downloaded by someone. And in this scenario, it was less about Medibank doing the wrong thing, but they seems to be specifically targeted by someone who really invested and put some time and energy into stealing it all. And they're now actively, we're essentially counting down the hours at the moment in Australia until that information is just dumped onto the internet for the world to see. So it'll be everyone tonight and tomorrow is in the security ecosystems quite alert to this one, and we'll see where that goes from here.
Okay. Now, they were the two headlines, and rightly so. We're talking about millions of people. But you mentioned, what was that, every 7 seconds, 75,000?
Yes, every 7 minutes. Every 7 minutes in Australia,
yeah.
Someone experiences an incident or something serious enough that they're going to call the Australian government and ask for help. So that's just those that tell and reach out to the government. We can imagine there'll be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of things happening on a given year in Australia. And the report, I guess the real scary part about the report is all the numbers in the report from the government are heading in the wrong direction. So the year before, it was every 8 minutes. Now it's every 7 minutes. The dangers, there's 25% more things that need to be worried about, according to the government, and the impacts to businesses is increasing as well. So it's costing businesses more, both at the small end as well as at the top end of town. So they're saying for a small business, if you have an incident, they're based on their reporting, it's going to cost you somewhere at about 40,000 Australian dollars. So it's not a cheap exercise to get on top of it and recover. And it's not just that, it's going to be pretty dramatic for a small business in particular, because you basically shut down while you deal with it. But as we're seeing, even with the likes of Medibank and Optus, and there's been a number of others in the last few weeks as well, the reputational damage, the cost of recovering. There's reports that Optus have lost 10% of their customers since the attack. Just completely devastating all around at the end of the day.
Now, you mentioned small business, and you guys focus on small business. So can you give us just some examples of things that small businesses should be looking out for? Yeah.
So the big trend that we've seen with small businesses in the last couple of years, particularly with COVID and everyone going and working remotely, is we've all kind of embraced and moved online and started using Google and Microsoft and all of it, Zoom and all these other systems and whatnot online. But we just kind of rapidly run full steam ahead at adopting these things without necessarily stopping and thinking about what security we need to put on. And so what we hear about often is people's, say, email accounts being taken over because they've reused a password somewhere, or they've been tricked into sharing it. And you can imagine all the stuff that's sitting around in your emails, Brendan. I'm sure it's not something that you want the world or someone unsavory in and having a look at. So that one's pretty common. The other one in a small business context as well, which is really devastating, is fake invoices or fraud around account transfers. So someone emailing you, asking you to change your bank account details, just trusting that because it's come from an email account, which coincidentally was taken over before. And then all of a sudden, money starts going to the wrong place and it's just never to be recovered. Really common type of thing. There's some of the big ones, but there's just a never-ending, evolving list of things as well. So it's really something that's continually changing and something you need to keep on top of. If you're even if you thought you were good and well and secure last year, things have changed. There's probably something that needs updating. You probably need to turn something on that you didn't realize was there. And there's some new attack and technique and scam out there that it's really important to be across and importantly let your team know about too.
That is very important these days. And Adam,
I'm giving you so much bad news, Brendan. It's terrible.
Yeah, well, let's get on to the good news because we're talking about problems and your business was really set up to be the solution. So if you could just give us some ideas, but let's focus on the small businesses. We'll let Optus and Medibank and their teams take care of themselves.
They're big enough and ugly enough, I'd say. Yeah, that's for sure.
What can they do? I know you had your team L up here last week doing some workshops that went very well attended. So what kind of things did you cover and what other things can Cynch do?
Yeah, so at Cynch we focus on, we try not to talk about the scary things too much, although it's important to acknowledge that. Instead, it's more about practical things small businesses can do to secure themselves. We call it cyber fitness. So it's about, just like your physical fitness, you want to sort of build it up gradually over time, small incremental steps. I'm pretty bad at the physical fitness side of things, but the cyber fitness things I'm not too bad at. The really important thing for every business to do in the first instance is to figure out what they have. So just understand and, figure out you've got Zoom, you've got Gmail, whatever it is that you're using. Then you can have a think about, well, what are the top 3 things? What's the scary stuff Adam was talking about or something else that I'm really concerned about today? And then just do something. The hardest part is really just figuring out, well, what is that thing? There's 1,000 different things you can do. You could turn on things like multi-factor authentication. If you're not familiar with that, you can go and have a look at that. You can make sure you've got a backup of your data. You can install the latest software updates. You can talk to your team about some scams. Like there's 1,000 things that you can do. All of them don't need to take long. So what we did at Cynch is we built a platform and an online tool that any business can sign up to, and it just steps you through step by step in plain language. So really straightforward. We don't use jargon. We don't talk like a technology person or an IT geek. And really just guide you through that. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the platform we built. And we built it in Australia. We're supporting about 900 businesses here in Australia at the moment. But we've been fortunate to now come over, as you mentioned, Brendan, and Al on the team has been over last week running our first series of workshops, exclusively available and provided to Thai businesses and designed specifically for the threats and the things that Thai businesses should be worrying about. Which is somewhat unique, sometimes a little bit different to what we experience here in Australia, but still a problem.
And you must be doing well for the businesses in Australia because I believe you had some support from the Australian government to get you over here as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we're really only able to come into Thailand and support the ecosystem there because of the amazing support from DFAT, so Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australia, has funded us essentially to go in, and we've just finished translating our entire platform into Thai since July, and then to actually support and importantly work with partners locally as well. So if you're watching this and you're a business that supports and works with other businesses and you'd like to sort of help them and reach out to them around cybersecurity and offer some support, get in contact. Everything we do, at least up until the end of June, is going to be completely free for Thai businesses. So we're really excited to get out and help even more. But yeah, it's we've got the first dozen or so on, and the feedback's been great. And it's been really exciting to see how we can support and help businesses locally in Thailand too.
Excellent. So we had Elle here last week. When do we see the rest of the team up here? Elle or yourself or Susie up here again?
Yeah, so our plan is we will be back periodically. We're trying to get into a monthly cadence, running workshops locally. But in the meantime, we're continuing to do things virtually as well. So we will be running and offering that out. So you'll see down here somewhere, where is it? Down here. Here's our website. You can go there, register interest, get your contact details in there, and we'll let you know when the next virtual session is, and or the next time we're in town in Bangkok, and you can come along and visit us, or we can come to you as well if you've got a few people that you want to get along to.
Fantastic. Or you can reach out to the AustCham team, of course, for an introduction to Adam and the Cynch team. So, Adam, thank you very much for joining us. I'll let you get back to sunny Melbourne.
That's it. It's I'll go back out and try to avoid the rain. It'll be fine.
Great. And I'll see you next time you're up here.
Will do. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, mate. Bye. Adam Selwood, co-founder at Cynch Security. Coming up next, Connections. Stay with us.
It is an industry where the agricultural sector can benefit, not just in cannabis, which people think of recreational cannabis, but also in industrial cannabis, in cannabis fibre, in CBD and medical cannabis. It's a broad industry. I think this industry has got a long way to go. It's more than smoke and mirrors, okay? It's more than just a quick high. It's an industry which has a long future.
So I think that there is a really big upside for Thailand. I think how they actually manage that policy is going to be really important. And I would hope that they take a world view and learn from what's happened across the world and take the best of each of those components and actually apply it, because there is some really big upsides. There's some big downsides unless they actually take those into account.
Personally, I think it should be restricted even more or regulated even more. I don't believe it should be free for everybody to buy. Everybody says that they've had the test done and they've done this and they've done that. It's still a drug. It still affects people's mind. It still causes depression.
Medicinal point of view, I encourage it, and I think a lot of people will benefit from medically. I can see it's going to bring a lot of employment. I see here, and I think it should be encouraged. So yeah.
I think there can only be an upside. I think medically, scientifically, the more it's studied, the better for everybody involved. I think if this can be applied to people with conditions that can be helped with a decriminalization of medical marijuana, I think that's a big plus for everybody.
It's an extremely bright future. Thailand is the perfect environment for growing cannabis and producing cannabis oil. Its medical applications are boundless. It's really only in its infancy, and it will become a huge export earner for the country in the future. So it's an industry that we shouldn't ignore, and that we should actually direct resource, people and understanding to making it even better than it is right now.
And welcome back. In our Connections section today, we're continuing with the theme of risk. And we spoke about cyber risk in the business section. We're going to move and talk about managing your health risk. Fortunate to be joined by two of our newer members for our Connections section. From Pacific Prime Thailand, we have Batten and Naambo Shivute. Guys, how are you?
Good, thank you for having us.
Great. So I've learned all about risk on my computers in the first section. I now think I need to be talking about my own personal health risk as well and how to manage that. So I'm going to start with a question that I've actually had on my mind for quite some time. What's the difference, Ricky, between going to a broker like yourselves and going straight to an insurance company?
Yeah, I mean, basically with brokers, it's value-added service. We can support a client if they were to, use their plan, or if they had a plan themselves and they weren't too happy with it. On the renewal, we can then support by basically shopping around for them in-house and providing, the most suitable plan, whether it be for their needs or certain conditions that they want covered. So that's what a broker would do.
Okay, so can I liken it to if I wanted to buy, say, a phone? If I know I want an Apple phone, I go straight there, I pick it up and I'm away. But if I'm not sure what I want and I'm looking for what best serves my needs, I'm probably better to go to something like a True Store where they've got lots of different options for me to buy. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, imagine walking into the Apple store and you have a phone that's being a bit glitchy.
Yeah.
The salesperson is going to recommend another Apple device.
Of course.
Right? Because that's all they have available. But if you go to the True Store, you will have in front of you 20 different providers. Right? As a broker, our job is to know what 20 phones are available on the market. What are the pros and cons of each of those phones? So maybe you're restricted by your budget. Maybe, as Ricky said, you're restricted by health conditions. There's a condition that you want covered, but you're not sure, will this phone suit my needs? That's where we come in, and we have that expertise to tell you this phone is good for these scenarios and not others.
And that's obviously very useful. I mean, when we're buying a phone, essentially you're choosing between which takes the cooler photos or which has more features, but it's a very limited choice you're making at the end of the day. But when it comes to your health, especially the older you get, and if you're bringing in families, etc., it's a very, I guess it can be a complicated and detailed decision.
Exactly, and that's what as a broker do. We advise, and we know the market, we know the products. So as Naambo said, we can say what's good, what's bad, if they want to use it, how to use it, and again, as a broker, we give that value-added support throughout the whole policy.
Yeah. And I think something that is also very important with your analogy with the phones is that when you're looking at these different devices, they look great, right? You don't know what the warranty says.
No.
So our job is to read that fine print, simplify everything for you, and make sure we completely understand in these scenarios, how will this phone respond to that situation, right? And so we have that information that is not available through a simple search on Google.
Right.
Yeah. So the value-added service.
Very good. Another item that this particularly applies to me living here so long is around the visa situation. Now, we've just launched, in our previous episode, we talked about the long-term residency visas, permanent residency, etc. And Mark, who presented on that, was quite, make sure you understand the insurance. And what you said then is very important, because it can be quite complicated and detailed again. So if I'm thinking of LTRs or other insurance, other visa type scenarios, can you give me just a couple of items of I should be across?
Just a few. I mean, basically.
Wait, does your broker help you with this currently? Because if not,
then you guys
we're
are here
more
to
than
help.
happy.
Well, there you go. With the retirement visa at the moment, there's a lot of confusion. You know, a lot of people are confused. What level of cover do I need based on the insurance or based on the visa? And over the last few years, especially when COVID has come in and all this insurance requirement for travelers, for people who are living here, what the immigration has been informing people, it can be confusing.
Yes.
So there, you know, at the moment, there's a certain level of cover. If you need the retirement visa, i.e. the OA or the OX visa, it varies. So at the moment, as we understand, you have to have 3 million Thai baht.
Right.
But as we come to learn, sometimes that can't be easy to explain because not everyone is communicating with each other. So what we try and do is to do the most compliant policy for that person based on their visa requirements, for example.
And we find a lot of the times people go and they search Facebook, when they go into group chats and they ask people how much is required. A lot of our customers, I think, are stuck on the COVID requirements. So they're asking for 400,000 inpatient, 40,000 outpatient, and we have to say, yes, that was correct 18 months ago.
18 months ago, the thing
But last week, things have changed. So, yeah, giving that guidance.
It must have been tough for you during COVID. It felt like the requirements, not only for insurance, but multiple things, were changing every week there at one stage. And insurance was a big part of it. It was just, you really did need to keep across it, which was difficult to do with everything else going on.
Very difficult. I mean, there's a lot of insurance companies launching certain products where we had to then educate ourselves in order to then educate our clients. So as you said, the requirements changed weekly. You know, people were buying insurance to come into the country, and then when they went to the airport, it was rejected, and then people were calling us in panic. So over the COVID period, it was very confusing at the time.
But it did give us also an opportunity to show our value, because there was so much confusion happening. And so it was a perfect scenario where you could interact with the client, and the first thing we did was calm them down. You know, yes, it's confusing. Yes, it's new. We're in the same situation. However, we are in talks with the people who are rolling these rules out. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you have the best product, the most compliant product. So it was positive in that sense, because the clients who stayed with us, the clients that we gained during that time, it was mainly because they really trusted in our guidance to make things clear.
And that, I imagine that I saw it across a lot of industries, and insurance would have been very important, that building trust factor where information was flying around. Good. I feel like I've invited you on here really to educate myself more than the audience here, because I've got a couple of more questions that I've been wanting to ask for a while. So Ricky, I'm going to come at you again with this one. Now, I've naturally got insurance as as a guy who's getting a bit older. And one thing I'm noticing, I'm still quite fit, so I'm not using my insurance that often, but it feels like my premiums are still going up. So
yeah,
I'm sure a couple of people are going to ask that.
That's a question we come across pretty much every day. Right. You know, I haven't used my insurance. Why is the premiums increasing? I mean, at the end of the day, cost of living is going up. Right. Medical inflation is a key factor. I think also the cost of medical treatment, not only in Thailand, this is everywhere. The prices go up, cost of treatment goes up. I mean, with COVID especially, this was a major factor in the cost of treatment. So hence, insurers have to increase their premiums in order to match medical inflation. So this is standard, and of course, the older you get, the more expensive it gets. Sure, so that is another factor that kicks in as well. It seems that older people are more prone to fall over.
Yeah, I mean, you look like you're in great shape, but our bodies are not recovering at the same pace that they were 20 years ago, right?
Exactly.
So the risk is higher.
So you're saying round is a shape then?
It
is. Obviously, I have both individual and medical family insurance for my family, but I'm sure our members are especially interested in the corporate packages. And Naambo, I believe that's why Pacific Prime brought you in as well.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing that I have to say, our office primarily handles individual insurance, and it's such a great relationship between Ricky's team and my team, because a lot of the clients that we have from a group perspective are those who we serviced for years as individuals. You know, clients who we helped clarify issues, submit claims, broker new insurance plans. And then after a while, they go, well, do you do corporate plans? And they've taken that to HR, where we've been able to help set up either local Thailand, regional, or even global accounts for some of our key accounts. So yes, that's something that we do prioritize, and it's essentially, we want to operate in such a way that we're an extension of their internal HR, you know, where we take over anything related to those HR needs when it comes to insurance, when it comes to reimbursement, escalations, anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, offering this, you know, going back to the value-added service, this doesn't cost the client anything. This is all done for free. There's no fee to having a broker. So going back to, you know, circling back to what we discussed, having a broker and an insurer, a value-added service, there's no additional cost. There's no hidden fees. We do this for the client as a value-added segment.
Good. And on the topic of value-added, I know, having previous conversations with you, it's not only about the insurance, you're quite big on the wellness and the promotion of wellness and activities around that. Can you just touch on that a bit?
Yeah. So we do have some clients that have extremely comprehensive medical insurance plans, which is great because everything's covered. As an account manager, I have to watch the claims and report back to the clients on a quarterly basis. So of course, even though they have comprehensive plans, we want to limit the cost, right? So with that in mind, and particularly with our other SME clients where they may not have that full budget to provide things like dental, wellness, maternity, we actually go out in the market and we partner with medical facilities in Thailand. So right now we have an agreement with Miskowan Hospitals, Dr. Donna through MedConsult, Samiti Bay Hospital.
Excellent.
And we have wellness plans where members can get a discounted rate for services that others would have to pay full price for. So this helps. It may not be out of pocket, it may not be included in the insurance plan, but at least it's something that we provide so that even though they don't have it with the company, they can still afford to pay for it.
Excellent. And on a personal note, I always love to hear AustCham members partnering the way you just mentioned.
AustCham members are the best.
Great. Well, thanks for that. Great to have you in here, and it's an important topic. I think we're almost forgetting about what COVID was, but the one thing we're not forgetting is the importance of taking care of one's health and preparing for when things don't go right, when the machine essentially breaks down occasionally.
Starts to glitch a little bit.
Absolutely. So for our members, if you're interested in knowing more about Pacific Prime, what they do and how they can give that value-added service to buying insurance, either family, individual or corporate, please contact Ricky and Naambo. You can find them at our events all the time, or we're just putting their website up here on the screen now. Ricky and Naambo, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us. Yeah. Thank you.
And that's it for the connection section. Coming up next, community. And I'm very pleased to be welcoming David Armstrong down from Gapeng Pet. Stay with us.
I'm Marcus Blackmore, and Blackmore's is a name you can trust.
Welcome back. In our community section today, we are very fortunate to be joined by what I would call one of AustCham Thailand's icons, an honorary member with it's a very impressive past, who we get to meet at most sundowners and still have a beer with and a chat. Talking about David Armstrong. David, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Brendan. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for joining me from Gapeng Pet.
It's great to see you.
Good. So we'll come back to where you are at Gapeng Pet soon, but I just thought our members do get to meet you at sundowners and have a chat and a beer, but I'm not sure everyone who's having a chat with you really knows a lot about your background, which I know people like myself who do know think it's quite impressive. So realistically, I think we'd need over an hour segment to cover everything you've done. We don't have that long, but I'd really like to just get to know your background a bit. And starting with, let's look at before you came to Thailand, Australia, other place in Asia, and then pre-2005, your arrival in Thailand. So you were a journalist, I believe.
I was a journalist. I started on what was then a new newspaper called The Australian in 1969, straight from university.
Wow.
I worked on The Australian, on the Bulletin magazine, which sadly is no longer with us, the Daily Telegraph in Sydney, Canberra Times. And I was lucky enough to end up as editor-in-chief of The Australian, which was quite fun, quite a good job, I thought.
I would imagine.
I had a bit of, my family had a bit of sadness in their lives. My wife died of motor neurone disease 21 years ago. And I stood down from The Australian.
Right.
Nothing very much for a while, and then I was asked to go to Hong Kong.
Right.
Chief editor of the South China Morning Post, which also was a fun job. I enjoyed that. I love Hong Kong.
It must be super interesting.
It was a very interesting time. It's the first of the really big demonstrations that Beijing tried to change the laws.
Right.
One of those couple of 100,000 people through the centre of Hong Kong. But South China Morning Post at that time had a 25% interest in Bangkok Post.
Right.
I was put on the board of Bangkok Post, and it happened that Bangkok Post at that time was without a managing director.
Right.
I was eventually asked to take on that role, so I came here in 2005. On May 1st of May 2005.
Wow. And took over running the Bangkok Post there.
As a bureaucrat, as a manager rather than as a journalist.
How was that transition, going from an editor to managing director? I assume the editors and managing directors to make great news would have to fight a lot, wouldn't they?
You don't have to fight a lot, but you have to resolve your disagreements. Yes.
Constructive conflict, I guess you would call it. You'd both need to, yeah.
I think it helped because I could understand the editor's point of view quite well. So
right.
We didn't have many fights. We got on well, particularly with working with people like Kun Pichai Chuan Suksawan,
yes,
who's a legend in Thai journalism.
Yes, certainly.
And who happened to be an old friend as well, so it's made it even better.
Oh, good. So before you arrived, you knew Kun Pichai as well?
I'd known Pichai for about 10 years at that point. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, that must have made it quite well to work together. So.
Yeah, it's a kind of brotherhood. If there's a non-sexist word for brotherhood, we'll please insert that.
Good.
And it's one of those things where you can meet someone one time and not meet them again for 10 years. It's as though you saw them last week.
Oh, wow. There must be a lot of stories behind the scenes at Bangkok Post that you probably can't share with us, but are there any, maybe one story that really stands out from when you were there, one of a big breaking story or something that happened that you just felt, gee, I'm glad I work in the newspaper business and I'm in the front line for this?
Exciting times, isn't it? I think the biggest single breaking story in my time was the first anti-Thaksin coup.
Right.
You cast your mind back at that stage, everyone thought coups were a thing of the past in Thailand.
Yeah.
The big coup in 1992, which did not end up well for the generals.
No.
You know, they had a more functioning parliamentary system. There'd be no more coups, and all of a sudden, bang, there was one. That's probably the biggest single breaking story. But we also had the rise of the yellow shirts and so on, and the occupation of the airport. Stories.
Right.
I think the big stories in Thailand in my time were mainly political, and mainly somehow or other involving Thaksin.
Yeah, it was, I suppose, as soon as you arrived, really, wasn't it? It was 2005, the first one, 2006, and then 2006, and interesting times from then on. Now, the AustCham were fortunate enough to rope you in to sit on the board not long after you arrived as well, I believe. So, did you join the board around 2008? Is that correct?
2009, I think. Contact with AustCham was in 2007. The late Tim Fisher,
right,
who had been Deputy Prime Minister, who of course was a frequent visitor to Thailand, and he addressed a lunch, which was hosted by AustCham. And Tim had this technique, which is really quite effective, where he would single out people he knew in the audience and mention them by name and say, it's good to see Bill, it's good to see Mary, it's good to see Harry, and so on. And I'd known Tim from my days as a state political reporter in the early 70s. So people he mentioned, which is, for me, a good introduction to AustCham.
Yes.
I started to get involved marginally then, doing a few things to help out one of your predecessors, Martin Kyle.
Yes.
And then in 2009, I joined the board.
Right.
It turned out to be a fairly short time formally on the board because of a little technicality. I retired from Bangkok Post, and by the end of 2010, I no longer had a work permit.
Right.
And there's a little technicality, which is that you need a work permit to be a director of AustCham.
To sit on the board. Yeah.
So I had to step out from the board, but I still kept up the connections with Andrew, the president, and Mark Carroll, the new editor. So I was still active, still doing things. And John Anderson, the subsequent president, kind of invented the position for AustCham of honorary advisors of the board. So I became the advisor of the board for a couple of years.
Good. Yeah, I know John Anderson's a fan. In fact, I think as soon as I started in my job, you were one of the first people John introduced me to as someone that was very important for me to know, I believe, was his words. That's proved to be true, of course. You've been with AustCham then for what we're looking more than a decade. How have you seen the chamber over the past 10 years evolve and different things happen?
When I first got involved, AustCham had a reputation of being just a party chamber.
Right.
So then, as now, was a big deal, a big thing. And I remember asking one of our regular Canadian guests, why did he come to Sundance? He said, because you Aussies throw the best parties. That was its reputation. I think it was unfair. But there are times where you have to deal with the perception as though it's reality. So we had to get down to work, focusing on AustCham as a business chamber.
Right.
Having a lot more meetings and lunches and talks and so on. And it fell to me to be running the SME committee, where I started working very closely with the New Zealand and British chambers.
Good.
Largely so we could hold functions where you could be assured that the audience would be big enough to attract serious speakers. So I worked closely with them, and that was, I think, kind of the start of the joint chamber events efforts. It got a lot more momentum, of course, when AustCham fell out. The AustCham and the British Chamber and the Americans, I think, fell out with the joint foreign chambers and decided to do things together. But it's one of the good things I think that has continued with AustCham is the cooperation with other chambers.
Yes, we have the Foreign Chamber Alliance still with the British Americans and Germans, of course.
So I actually ended up, through my connections with the British Chamber, being an honorary advisor to the British Chamber. It's the first non-Thai to be an honorary advisor. We did it in reverse. We had the organising from the British Chamber's end, organising functions where we also invited AustCham and the Americans and the Kiwis.
And that relationship is still very strong today with the British, of course, the Kiwis. We just had an event today with the South Africans on lead and the British. So the Southern Hemispheres are, of course, very close, and the British, Americans, Germans, Dutch, the Foreign Chamber relationships remain strong, and it's obviously people like yourself who built it at the beginning and for us to continue to flourish.
Well, I think it's very good. And you look now at AustCham, you look at the number of events that it has, number of gatherings, lectures, talks, lunches, online meetings. There's no way now you could characterise AustCham as just a party group.
No, I think we still get that title somewhere, but it's not just that. It's very much a focused business chamber who are also Australians who are good to hang out with and network.
That's right. We had a small problem there. Someone briefed, I don't know who it was, but someone briefed an incoming ambassador to the effect that we were just a party chamber. And we had to work hard. To persuade him that wasn't the case and make sure we had a good connection from the embassy, and we had the support of the embassy. And in the end, at the end of his term of office, this was Paul Grigson. Paul addressed an AustCham dinner. So I think in the end, we persuaded even the main doubter.
And once again, that relationship has stayed all the way through since then as well. We had very strong relationship with the embassy and ambassadors that have followed. So sounds like a lot of work had to go in back in the time to set up for us to benefit now.
Well, it's a lot of work that's gone on in the years since then, of course. And I look on it now, I can see, even though I'm more on the outside, I can see how close the embassy is and how involved the ambassadors have been, which is, I think, excellent. The other thing we started then, this is mainly an initiative of Andrew Durio as president. We started revving up the Australian alumni.
Right.
And brought in Kunluk and so on.
Yes.
And that's still going very strong.
Yes.
It grew strong enough to spread its own wings and fly, as it were, but still very closely connected to AustCham, which
absolutely.
One of the best things we can do, I think, as a chamber, to bring the Thai students who studied in Australia in return, to bring them closer to the Australian community and closer to Australian business.
That would be good.
Rather than just saying, "Oh, bye now."
Yes, well, it's hopefully we know from previous experience, everyone has a great life experience, education, maybe some work as well in Australia. And if you want to recreate that, then places like AustCham, alumni groups, and bringing those together, of course, the best way to do it.
Absolutely.
So just moving on to where you are now then, David, you're up at Gapeng Pet. I was speaking with our previous interview and said I'd be speaking to you from Gapeng Pet, and they mentioned, where's that? And I mentioned Sukhothai. And, oh, yes. So let's just touch on Gapeng Pet and why people should make sure they stop in there and see you at Mango House if they're headed up north from Bangkok.
Yeah. Well, one of the nice things that happened is that I married a lady called Nishapar, who was then working for an American IT company, but she came from Gapeng Pet. We bought land by the Ping River with an idea of doing something or other with it. And then, gosh, when was it? It's almost 10 years ago, 2013, we started building a small hotel and a restaurant and a house. And Gapeng Pet is a quiet little place, but it's a place of some historical significance. It's a UNESCO town, World Heritage, mainly because it's got 50 or 60 ancient temples, which were built as part of the expansion of the Sukhothai kingdom, then later the Ayutthaya kingdom. And Gapeng Pet was a key town in the Sukhothai period, which is a period when the kings took on as what we would call a state religion, took on Buddhism as a state religion, and a big expansion of temple building and so on. So Gapeng Pet ended up with building 50 or 60 temples, but it was also a military outpost. In those days, of course, there were no going back 500 or 600 years, there were no roads. So when the invaders were coming from the north, which was either Burma or Chiang Mai, they came down the river.
Right.
They had to get past this big fort in Gapeng Pet, in this big walled city. So it's important then as a military outpost, and it was also important as a trading centre because it controlled the river trade, and quite a big export trade. There was I remember reading that in the 16th century, this is a terrible thing in its own right, but they were exporting about 150,000 deer skins a year.
Wow.
To Japan. And they were being sent to Japan for samurai to make the leather armor wear that they wore.
Interesting.
You see the samurai on television, just think of the poor little deers from
a Thai product. Made in Thailand, it should have on there.
But it's an interesting place because it was a military outpost. Any invader coming down the river couldn't leave Gapeng Pet behind it because they would be able to resupply Sukhothai or Ayutthaya and mount attacks from behind them. So Gapeng Pet was when the Burmese captured Ayutthaya and sacked Ayutthaya, they captured Gapeng Pet along the way.
Right.
After I think about 3 weeks or a month of fighting, as far as I can work out. So the temples suffered from age and weather and wear, and they also suffered from war damage and pilfering, which means they're not as pretty as some of the temples in Sukhothai or Ayutthaya, but there's a kind of gritty reality about them.
Right.
I find quite attractive, and there's another benefit which you I think have noticed on your time here, that because no one pays too much attention to this quiet little town, the historical park areas are not overwhelmed by tourists. And
not at all.
You go around and have the place not quite to yourself, but almost, and study things at your leisure.
Yeah. That was one of my favourite parts of it, just the fact that it was so relaxed and you could walk around and you're not surrounded by 1,000 tourists essentially taking selfies.
That's right, and they're called historical park. And I like to think the term actually has some meaning in Gapeng Pet because it's full of trees. So the historical temples are surrounded by beautiful big trees.
Yes.
Surrounded teak trees, another section surrounded by just normal native forest. And that is called the second section is called the Temples in the Forest area. When they decided they wanted to build a little bit further out of town, and they built inside about a kilometre away from the old wall city.
Right. David, could you say if you want a really touristy experience, probably, and this isn't a negative comment at all, but it's a real touristy experience, Sukhothai's a good bet. They've got a lot more little cafes near the area and a lot of people and a lot of groups and etc. But if you're after a bit more of a real experience and get in a little bit more research into Thai history and culture, etc., then Gapeng Pet's a must stop on your travels as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I find Gapeng Pet more interesting to look at than say Sukhothai. Even though Sukhothai, of course, is grander. It was the capital of the Sukhothai kingdom. But there's, as I said before, a kind of gritty reality to the buildings in Gapeng Pet. Also, funny enough, it's got a Hindu shrine. I don't know where that comes from, but 500 years ago they built a shrine to Shiva. Maybe they're just hedging their bets or something, but
that's a good way to look at it. Well,
museum.
Well, on that, David, I'd like to recommend to our AustCham members, if you are thinking of travelling, Gapeng Pet is a 4-hour drive north of Bangkok. You could, of course, head on to Sukhothai after it. It's not that far away. And if you are, drop in and see David and Nichapa at Mango House Resort. We'll flash that website up here now so that you're able to find it. Or even easier than booking online, you could see David at most of our Sundowner or other events. Say hello, have a bit of a chat. As I mentioned, his background, we need more than the time we have here. We didn't get really to talk much about Australia or Hong Kong. I'm sure there's a lot more fascinating conversations there. So make sure you say g'day to David at future events. David, thank you so much for your time. I'll see you at the Christmas Sundowners, right?
Indeed. Thank you for your time and your interest, Brendan. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. David Armstrong, Honorary Member with AustCham Thailand. And that's it for our program today. Thanks for joining us.